It was the kind of afternoon that makes the city feel heavier than usual. Gray clouds hung low over the skyline, and the air carried that faint metallic scent that comes before rain. You could hear the distant hum of traffic, the impatient horns, the hurried footsteps of people who had somewhere better to be. Inside a small coffee shop, tucked between a dry cleaner and a pawn shop, a man sat alone at a corner table. His name was Daniel. He was in his 40s, dressed simply, his posture relaxed in a way that seemed almost out of place in the frantic rhythm of the city. Across from him, a younger man leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "You can't just ignore this, Daniel. You have to fight back. You have to show them you're not weak." The younger man's words came fast, like machine gun fire, each one carrying a little more urgency. But Daniel just sat there, hands wrapped loosely around his coffee mug, his gaze steady, unshaken. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even frown. He simply let the words pass over him, like water flowing around a stone. To someone watching, it might have looked like indifference, but it wasn't. Daniel heard every word. He just didn't let them dictate his state of mind. Years ago, he might have reacted differently, snapped back, argued, tried to prove himself right. But now he understood something that most people don't. Reacting on impulse doesn't make you stronger. It makes you predictable, and predictable people are easy to control. Daniel had learned through years of trial, loss, and hard-earned self-mastery that the real game isn't about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself so completely that no one can pull the strings on your emotions. This is where Stoic philosophy enters, not as an abstract, dusty concept from ancient Rome, but as a living, breathing force in the modern world. The Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, understood that life would always be full of attempts to control you. Sometimes it comes from obvious sources, bosses, partners, rivals. Sometimes it's subtle, a sarcastic remark, a passive-aggressive email, a manipulative smile. But the principle remains: you cannot stop the world from trying to push you. You can, however, decide whether you will move. Imagine someone reaches into your chest and grabs the strings of your heart. Every time they pull, you react. Anger, fear, defensiveness, even joy if they dangle the right kind of bait. That's what happens when you let others control your inner state. Stoic philosophy is about cutting those strings. It's about reclaiming the right to decide when and how you respond. It's about realizing that power doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from refusing to be dominated from within. And yet, this isn't about being passive. The Stoic man isn't a doormat. He isn't numb. He feels everything: pain, joy, grief, love. But he refuses to be enslaved by any of it. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't telling us to hide from life. He was telling us to engage with it fully, but on our terms. The thing is, people can smell weakness, even if they don't admit it. If you're easily provoked, you're easy to predict. And if you're easy to predict, you're easy to manipulate. The modern world thrives on emotional reactivity, social media outrage, political polarization, marketing campaigns designed to stir desire or fear. The less control you have over yourself, the more power the world has over you. But here's the twist. Once you stop letting people control you, you become unpredictable. You're no longer dancing to their music, no longer pulled into every petty drama. Instead, you stand still in the storm, and others start to wonder why they can't shake you. That's when the balance of power shifts. You might be thinking, easier said than done. And you'd be right. Self-mastery isn't built overnight. It's forged in the quiet moments when you want to react, but you don't. It's in the decision to let an insult pass, not because you're afraid, but because you understand it's not worth giving away your peace. Every time you choose not to be moved by someone else's attempt to provoke you, you build another layer of inner armor. And this armor isn't made of coldness, it's made of clarity. If you've ever walked away from a heated conversation and later thought, "Why did I let them get to me?" you know exactly what's at stake here. That moment of regret is the realization that you handed someone else the remote control to your emotions. Stoicism teaches you how to take it back, and maybe that's the real question you should be asking yourself right now. If someone tried to push your buttons today, how quickly would they find them? That question lingers because deep down, you already know the answer. You know who gets under your skin, who knows exactly which words to use to trigger you. Picture them right now, the colleague, the family member, the stranger online. Now imagine standing in front of them and feeling absolutely nothing when they try. Imagine the look on their face when they realize they can't reach you anymore. That's not coldness, that's freedom. Daniel's story didn't start in that quiet coffee shop. It began years earlier in a fluorescent-lit corporate office where he was the youngest team leader in the building. Back then, he cared too much about what others thought. If a superior criticized him, it haunted his mind for days. If a coworker gave him the cold shoulder, he'd overthink it, wondering what he did wrong. He was smart, competent, but constantly at the mercy of other people's moods. And because of that, they could push him around without ever raising their voice. They knew he'd bend if they applied just the right pressure. It took a single brutal incident to change him. A senior manager called him into the office and, in front of several colleagues, questioned his competence in a way that was both calculated and humiliating. The younger Daniel felt the heat rush to his face. His pulse pounded. He wanted to defend himself, to shout back, to make it stop. But the more he reacted, the more control he gave away. He didn't realize it then, but the humiliation wasn't just in the words. It was in how easily they could make him lose himself. For days afterward, he replayed the scene in his mind, each time imagining a better comeback, a sharper defense. But then he stumbled upon a passage from Epictetus. If anyone tells you that such a person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He does not know my other faults, else he would not have mentioned only these." It hit him like a quiet explosion. The real strength wasn't in winning the argument. It was in not needing to. That was the moment he decided to stop being a puppet to other people's strings. From then on, Daniel started practicing. Not in grand confrontations, but in small daily moments. When someone cut him off in traffic, he didn't chase them. When a colleague made a passive-aggressive comment, he didn't bite. When his phone buzzed with an angry email, he didn't fire back instantly. He learned to pause, to create a gap between the event and his response. That gap, he realized, was where freedom lived. And maybe that's the part most people miss. You don't need to win every fight to win the war. Sometimes the smartest move is no move at all. Daniel began to notice something strange as he practiced this restraint. People treated him differently. At first, they were frustrated, accustomed to the old Daniel, the one who would react, explain, justify, get tangled in their emotional nets. Now their bait hung in the air with no bite. Eventually, they stopped trying. And here's the unexpected part. Those same people began to respect him more, not because he had become louder, but because he had become unshakable. There is a silent authority in a man who does not flinch. This is one of the paradoxes of Stoic philosophy. The less you fight for control over others, the more control you seem to have. It's not about manipulation, it's about stability. People naturally gravitate toward the steady hand in a storm. In the modern world, where everyone is reacting to everything, the man who doesn't take the bait stands out like a lighthouse in the chaos. There's a scene I remember from a small-town diner in Ohio. I was there for breakfast, and a man in his 50s was sitting at the counter sipping coffee. A younger guy came in, clearly agitated, and started talking loudly about politics, trying to spark an argument. The older man just smiled faintly, nodded, and went back to his eggs. You could see the younger guy's frustration growing. He wanted a reaction, any reaction, but he got nothing. After a few minutes, he gave up and left. The older man, he finished his coffee in peace. That's what it looks like when you stop letting people control you. Not some grand philosophical gesture, but a simple refusal to give away your peace of mind. Think about it. How many times have you burned hours, even days, replaying an argument in your head? How many nights have you lost sleep because of someone else's opinion? What would your life look like if those moments simply didn't touch you anymore? When you practice Stoicism in the modern world, you're not rejecting emotion. You're rejecting emotional slavery. The Stoics never said, "Don't feel." They said, "Don't be ruled by what you feel." Marcus Aurelius was an emperor with unimaginable responsibilities, yet his private writings are filled with reminders to himself to stay calm, to focus only on what he could control, to let insults pass like wind through the trees. If a man who ruled an empire needed to remind himself daily not to be dragged into other people's storms, what makes us think we can go without that discipline? Daniel's transformation wasn't immediate. He slipped up plenty of times. There were moments when a sharp comment would hit him in just the right spot, and he'd feel the old heat rise. But each time, he became quicker at catching it, quicker at noticing that moment before reaction. Over time, that pause became second nature. The gap between stimulus and response became wider, and in that space, Daniel found power. This skill started spilling over into every area of his life. At work, when deadlines loomed and panic spread through the office, he stayed calm. At home, when his teenage son tested boundaries, he listened instead of lecturing. Even in the small things, standing in line at the DMV, dealing with a rude cashier, he treated each moment as practice. It wasn't about the situation, it was about the choice. He realized that every encounter was an opportunity to train his mind, to strengthen the muscle of self-control. And here's the secret that the world doesn't want you to know. When you're no longer easy to provoke, you become much harder to manipulate. People can't sell you fear if you're not afraid. They can't sell you outrage if you're not outraged. They can't sell you envy if you're content. One evening, Daniel was out with a few friends at a bar. A guy he barely knew started making comments that were clearly meant to undermine him, joking about his past, hinting at mistakes he'd made years ago. Everyone at the table looked to see how Daniel would respond. He could have defended himself, could have thrown an insult back. Instead, he laughed softly and said, "You might be right." Then he turned the conversation to another topic. The tension evaporated. The other guy was left holding an unused weapon, confused that it hadn't landed. Daniel's friends noticed. Later, one of them pulled him aside and said, "Man, I don't know how you do that, but it's intimidating in a good way." What Daniel was doing, consciously or not, was applying one of the oldest Stoic strategies, refusing to hand over the keys to his emotional state. He understood that an insult only works if you accept it. Like a package you can refuse at the door, provocation can be left unopened. Once you understand this, the world starts looking very different. The news tries to stir your anger. You observe without being consumed. Social media tries to sell you a lifestyle by making you feel inadequate. You see the play and it fails to land. Someone tries to guilt you into doing something against your better judgment. You can say no without apology. This is what freedom looks like, not isolation, not detachment from life, but detachment from the hooks others try to sink into your mind. If you can learn to pause, just pause before reacting, you can change the entire trajectory of your day, your week, your life. Daniel once told me something that stuck with me for years. Most people think the loudest person in the room has the most power, he said. But the truth is, the person with the most power is the one who doesn't need to speak at all. At first, I thought he was being poetic. Later, I realized he was describing the essence of Stoic strength. You don't win by overpowering others. You win by being impossible to overthrow from within. We live in a time when everything is designed to get a reaction out of you. Politicians, brands, influencers, They all want you hooked, outraged, desperate for more. They know if they can make you feel something intensely, they can direct your behavior. They can get you to click, to buy, to share, to fight. But when you stop reacting on autopilot, you stop playing their game. You're no longer the lab rat pressing the lever for another hit of dopamine. You're the scientist watching the experiment from outside the cage. One of the most powerful exercises Daniel adopted was what he called the invisible shield. Whenever someone tried to provoke him through an insult, a guilt trip, or an emotional plea, he'd visualize a clear shield between them and his mind. He could hear them, understand them, even feel the emotional charge in the air, but nothing got through unless he let it. Over time, the shield stopped being imaginary. It became his natural state. And it wasn't coldness, it was control. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing nobody can make you feel small without your permission. Imagine walking into a tense meeting and staying calm while everyone else loses their composure. What kind of life could you build if nothing could shake your inner foundation? Daniel's practice wasn't just about handling negativity, it also changed how he handled praise. Most people think compliments are harmless, but the Stoics understood they can be just as dangerous as insults. If you rely on praise for your sense of worth, you give people power over you. They can lift you up or take you down at will. Daniel learned to appreciate kind words without becoming addicted to them. He no longer needed external validation to feel steady. That steadiness began to pay off in unexpected ways. At work, he became the go-to person for solving problems under pressure. Friends began to seek his advice, not because he always had the answers, but because he never panicked. Even in conflicts, his calmness became a subtle form of influence. When others saw that he couldn't be rattled, they started to trust his judgment more. They started to follow his lead. He also noticed how much mental space he'd reclaimed. Without the constant churn of replaying arguments or obsessing over what someone meant by a comment, his mind was free to focus on meaningful work. He read more, created more, planned for the future without being distracted by the noise of other people's dramas. This is something the Stoics knew well, that the less you are controlled by the opinions of others, the more time and energy you have for what truly matters. One day, while sitting in that same coffee shop where our story began, a stranger approached Daniel. "You seem different," the man said, "like you're not in a rush, but also not detached. What's your secret?" Daniel smiled. "It's not a secret," he replied. "It's just knowing that nobody owns me. Not my boss, not my friends, not the world. I listen, but I choose. That's the kind of freedom you can't buy, can't fake, and can't lose unless you give it away. And it all begins with a decision. Who gets to own your mind today? This decision, once made, has to be made again and again. There's no finish line where you suddenly become immune to manipulation forever. The Stoics practice daily because life never stops testing you. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself every morning, preparing for the people he would meet, those who would be selfish, deceitful, arrogant, not because he hated them, but because he refused to be surprised or controlled by them. He expected the world to be the world, and he expected himself to remain himself. Daniel embraced the same approach. Before walking into a meeting, he'd remind himself, "I can't control them, but I can control me." Before answering an email that could turn confrontational, he'd pause and breathe. Before reacting to news or gossip, he'd ask, "Will this matter a year from now?" That single question saved him countless hours of wasted energy. He once told me about an argument he had with a family member. In the past, it would have spiraled into days of tension. This time, he listened quietly, acknowledged their feelings, and ended the conversation without raising his voice. Later, that family member admitted they'd been hoping to provoke him. "You didn't give me anything to work with," they said. And that's the point. If you don't feed the fire, it burns out. The truth is, you can't stop people from trying to control you, but you can stop handing them the keys. And once you do, the world starts to feel a lot less heavy. Daniel's life began to shift in ways that went beyond what he expected. It wasn't just about staying calm in tense situations anymore. It was about a fundamental change in how he saw the world. Before, he thought life was a constant tug-of-war for control. If someone pushed him, he had to push back harder. If someone disrespected him, he had to prove them wrong. But now, he realized the real victory was in refusing to play that game at all. It was like walking off a chessboard where the other player keeps waiting for your move, only to realize you're not playing anymore. One Friday afternoon, his team at work was facing a last-minute crisis. A major client had called, furious about a mistake in the latest project delivery. The room was thick with tension. People spoke in clipped sentences, keyboards clattered as they tried to fix the error, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stress. In the past, Daniel might have joined the panic. Now he walked in, assessed the situation quietly, and began assigning tasks calmly, one at a time. No raised voice, no blame, no drama. Within 2 hours, the problem was fixed. Later, one of his colleagues told him, "When you walked in, it felt like the storm stopped for a second." That's the kind of leadership Stoic philosophy creates. Not through intimidation, but through unshakable presence. Think about that for a moment. How many storms in your own life could be calmed if you stopped reacting and started observing first? How many conflicts could be disarmed if you didn't take the bait the moment it's dangled in front of you? Daniel also began to notice how much the culture around him thrived on control, not the kind that comes from authority, but the subtle, everyday kind. Ads tried to make him feel incomplete, so he'd buy something. News headlines tried to make him angry, so he'd keep watching. Social media tried to make him compare himself to strangers, so he'd crave approval. It was everywhere once you knew how to see it. And that's exactly what Stoicism had given him, the ability to see the hook before it caught him. He told me about a night when he was scrolling through his phone, feeling restless. Normally he would have kept scrolling, feeding the unease, but this time he stopped, put the phone down, and sat in silence for a few minutes. It was uncomfortable at first, like scratching an itch you can't reach. Then he felt something he hadn't in a long time, clarity. The noise in his head quieted, and he realized just how much of his life had been spent reacting to things that didn't matter. From then on, he treated every emotional tug as a test. If someone made him angry, he'd ask himself, what do they gain if I react? If someone tried to flatter him, he'd ask, what do they gain if I believe this? It wasn't about becoming cynical, it was about becoming aware. The Stoics didn't tell us to distrust everyone. They told us to trust our ability to remain steady no matter what others do. And maybe that's the real shift, when you stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start asking, why am I letting this affect me? You take back the power that was always yours. There was one moment in particular that proved to Daniel how far he'd come. He was attending a large family gathering, one of those events where everyone talks over each other and old grudges float to the surface like oil on water. An uncle made a pointed joke about a decision Daniel had made years ago that didn't turn out well. The younger Daniel would have felt the sting, maybe even shot back a sarcastic remark. This time he smiled, nodded, and said, "Yeah, I learned a lot from that." Then he changed the subject. His uncle blinked, clearly caught off guard, and the conversation moved on. It wasn't that Daniel didn't care, it was that he chose what to care about. He didn't need to defend his ego in every battle, and in letting go of that need, he discovered something deeper. The less you try to prove yourself to others, the more self-respect you build. That's not just philosophy, it's survival in a world where everyone is trying to sell you their version of what matters. Because here's the truth. If you don't decide who you are and what matters to you, someone else will decide for you, and they'll profit from it. Daniel once said to me over coffee, when you stop letting people control you, you start to see how much of your life you've been living on their terms without even realizing it. He wasn't exaggerating. Before embracing Stoic philosophy, his choices, big and small, were often reactions. He'd accept invitations he didn't want because he didn't want to offend. He'd overcommit at work because he didn't want to seem lazy. He'd spend money he didn't have because he didn't want to look cheap. It wasn't that he lacked intelligence, it was that he lacked ownership over his own compass. The shift came when he realized that every yes, made out of fear, guilt, or social pressure, was just another thread in the web that kept him trapped. So he started experimenting with small acts of self-sovereignty, politely declining invitations, taking a full day offline, saying, "I'll think about it," instead of automatically agreeing. And every time he did, the world didn't fall apart. If anything, it got quieter. People respected his boundaries more. The ones who didn't, well, he realized those were the ones who benefited most from his lack of boundaries in the first place. It's in these everyday choices that Stoicism becomes real. It's not about standing on a mountaintop in a toga contemplating the universe. It's about deciding in a Tuesday afternoon meeting that you're not going to let someone's bad mood dictate yours. It's about seeing manipulation for what it is and stepping aside instead of charging into it. Ask yourself, how many of your decisions in the past month were truly yours? And how many were the result of someone else's expectations steering you without you even noticing? One night, Daniel was having dinner with an old friend. They hadn't seen each other in years, and the conversation turned to relationships. His friend admitted that he often found himself doing things just to keep the peace, even when it meant going against his own needs. Daniel nodded slowly. "I used to think that was kindness," he said, "but it's not. Real kindness comes from choice, not from fear. If you can't say no, your yes doesn't mean anything." That line stuck with me. It's exactly what the Stoics meant when they talked about living in alignment with your own reason and values. If you're constantly bending to avoid discomfort, you're not living. You're performing for an audience that might not even be paying attention. Daniel's refusal to be controlled didn't make him arrogant or closed off. It actually made his relationships better, because when he said yes, it was genuine. When he offered help, it came from strength, not obligation. And when he disagreed, he did so without hostility, because he no longer needed to win in order to feel whole. There's an almost magnetic quality to that kind of person. People sense that you can't be swayed by cheap tactics or emotional traps. They either rise to meet you at that level, or they drift away, unable to get the reaction they want. Either way, your life becomes less crowded with noise. Here's the paradox. When you stop trying to please everyone, you end up attracting the right people and repelling the wrong ones without lifting a finger. Daniel once told me about a coworker who constantly tried to undermine him. Subtle comments in meetings, sarcastic remarks in the hallway, little digs meant to chip away at his credibility. The old Daniel would have fought back, maybe even gone to HR. The new Daniel, he didn't feed it. He treated every jab as if it were harmless air. After a few months, the coworker stopped. Without an audience, without a reaction, the performance lost its purpose. That's the thing about people who try to control you. They rely on your participation. Take that away and they're left holding nothing. The Stoics called this the art of indifference, not in the sense of not caring about anything, but in caring only about what truly matters. It's the difference between being stone and being anchored. The stone is cold, lifeless. The anchor is steady, rooted, but still connected to the living waters around it. Daniel wasn't stone. He still laughed, still cared, still engaged with people deeply. He just didn't let himself be swept away by every current. If you could master that, if you could walk into any situation knowing nothing could drag you from your center, what would change for you? One of the most profound changes in Daniel's life happened so quietly, he almost missed it. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or big public victory. It was an afternoon in his apartment, sitting alone at his kitchen table with a cup of tea. The window was open, letting in the late autumn air, and he realized something. His mind felt still. No racing thoughts about who might be upset with him. No mental replay of old arguments. No imaginary debates about what he should have said. Just stillness. He told me later it felt like his brain had been running a marathon for years, and for the first time, it was sitting down to rest. That's when he understood the real gift of Stoicism. It wasn't about looking strong on the outside. It was about feeling free on the inside. Freedom from the constant tug of other people's moods, opinions, and judgments. Freedom from the idea that you owe the world a performance every day just to be accepted. It was like taking off a backpack he didn't even know he'd been carrying. Of course, the world didn't magically change because Daniel did. The same challenges, the same difficult people, the same manipulative games still showed up. The difference was that now they bounced off him instead of sinking in. And sometimes the most unexpected thing happened. People around him began to change too. His calmness had a way of diffusing others. The coworker who used to interrupt him in meetings began speaking more respectfully. Friends who were used to him saying yes to everything started asking if he had the time or energy before making plans. It's like they could sense the shift, and they adjusted accordingly. Isn't it strange how, when you stop reacting, the whole world seems to soften its grip on you? Or maybe it's not the world changing at all. It's you finally holding your ground. One weekend, Daniel decided to test himself. He went to visit a part of town he usually avoided, an area filled with loud street vendors, aggressive salespeople, and crowded sidewalks. It was the kind of place where every step feels like a small battle for space and attention. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes calm. Vendors called out to him, some waving trinkets in front of his face, others trying to guilt him into supporting local business. A younger Daniel would have felt pressure to stop, to engage, maybe even to buy something just to end the interaction. This time he simply smiled, shook his head, and kept walking. No guilt, no irritation, no internal lecture, just presence. Later, over a coffee at a quiet cafe, he told me it wasn't about resisting temptation or confrontation. It was about seeing clearly. When you know what's yours to carry and what's not, he said, you stop picking up things that don't belong to you. That sentence stuck with me for days. How much of our stress comes from picking up burdens we were never meant to hold? Other people's anger, other people's expectations, other people's timelines. We pile them on until we're crushed, then wonder why we feel powerless. Daniel had learned to travel lighter, and the lighter he traveled, the more energy he had for the things he actually cared about. Work that mattered, relationships that fed him, moments of quiet that let him think. What would your life feel like if you only carried what was truly yours? How much lighter could you move through the world? Daniel's transformation didn't go unnoticed by the people closest to him. Some admired it openly, saying things like, "You seem different, more grounded." Others were less direct, testing his new boundaries to see if they could still push the old buttons. His younger brother, for example, used to tease him relentlessly, knowing Daniel would always snap back. But one evening during a family game night, when the usual jabs started flying, Daniel simply laughed and asked if anyone wanted more chips. The room went quiet for a beat, as if everyone was recalibrating. There was no tension, no sulking, just a subtle but unmistakable shift in power. It's not that Daniel had won, it's that the game had ended without anyone realizing. The beauty of Stoic philosophy is that it's invisible when practiced well. There's no grand announcement that you're above something. No smug lecture about self-control. It's in the absence of reaction, in the quiet certainty of knowing who you are and what you value. That's why it works. Manipulators thrive on chaos, and when they can't create it, they lose then their leverage. Daniel told me about a conversation with a mentor who once said, "Most people are like flags. They go whichever way the wind blows. A Stoic is like the pole. The wind can howl, but the pole stands." That image stayed with him. It wasn't about resisting every gust with brute force. It was about being anchored so deeply in your own principles that no gust could uproot you. When was the last time you felt like the pole instead of the flag? Or have you been letting the winds of others' opinions set your direction without even realizing it? One particularly telling moment came at work during a heated strategy meeting. Two department heads were arguing loudly, voices rising, egos clashing. The tension was so thick it seemed like everyone in the room was holding their breath. Daniel sat back, hands folded, watching. When the argument paused, someone turned to him and said, "Well, Daniel, what do you think?" He spoke slowly, clearly, without taking sides, just focusing on the facts and the best outcome for the project. By the time he finished, the room had shifted from combat to collaboration. People leaned forward instead of crossing their arms. It wasn't magic, it was the calm authority that comes from not needing to win in order to speak with conviction. That's another thing the Stoics understood. When you stop seeing every interaction as a battle, you can actually influence more. The irony is that the less you fight for control, the more control you have. Not over others, but over yourself. And that self-control is magnetic. It changes the way people respond to you, because it signals that you're not playing by the same desperate rules they are. Daniel wasn't trying to outsmart anyone anymore. He was just unshakable. And in a world where most people are one insult away from losing their cool, that's rare enough to look like genius. Imagine walking through your day like that. No one able to push you into a reaction you didn't choose. How different would your life look if nothing could hijack your peace without your permission? One evening, Daniel and I were sitting on his porch, the sun dipping low behind the rooftops. The air had that cool edge that hinted at the change of seasons. We weren't talking about anything deep, just the usual small talk, when he suddenly said, "You know what the real trick is? Realizing that no one is actually controlling you unless you hand them the keys." He set down his mug and looked out toward the horizon. We think people have power over us because they're louder or more confident, or because they know the right words to push our buttons. But those buttons, we're the ones who keep wiring them up, and we can take them out. That image hit me hard, like your emotions and reactions are switches on a board, and you get to decide which ones even exist. If someone's anger always flips your frustration switch, maybe you can remove the wire. If someone's guilt trips pull you into resentment, you can disconnect that circuit entirely. It's not easy work, but it's work you can actually do. And once those switches are gone, manipulation becomes a whole lot harder. Daniel told me about a time a former boss tried to use urgency to control him, calling at odd hours with emergencies that weren't really emergencies. The old Daniel would have jumped every time, sacrificing sleep and peace of mind to appear dependable. The new Daniel answered calmly, said he'd handle it in the morning, and went back to bed. The next day, the so-called urgent matter had already resolved itself. He realized then that half the control others had over him was based on illusions. Illusions he'd accepted without question. What illusions are you still treating like unshakable truths? And what would happen if you stopped believing them? In the months that followed, Daniel's circle got smaller, but his life got bigger. Some friends faded away when they realized they couldn't use his old patterns against him. Others grew closer, appreciating the steadiness and honesty he brought into their interactions. His work improved, not because the job changed, but because his focus was no longer scattered across 100 tiny fires that weren't his to put out. One of the most fascinating things I noticed was that Daniel didn't talk about Stoicism much. He wasn't preaching philosophy or quoting Marcus Aurelius every other sentence. He was living it, in the way he answered questions, in the pauses before he spoke, in the way he walked away from conflict without carrying it home. People who knew him long enough started to ask what had changed, and he'd just smile and say, "I stopped giving my peace away." And that's really the heart of it. We think other people take our peace, when in reality, we hand it to them, piece by piece, through our reactions, our compliance, our silence when we should speak, our speech when we should stay silent. Stoicism doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you unwilling to be owned. If tomorrow you decided not to hand over a single piece of your peace, how much of yourself would you get back? Winter came, and with it, the quiet. Daniel had always dreaded this time of year, the long nights, the heavy skies. But now something was different. He found himself enjoying the stillness, walking alone through streets dusted with snow, hearing the crunch under his boots. He told me once that Stoicism felt a lot like winter, not cold or lifeless, but clear, stripped of excess, revealing the bare bones of what actually matters. Without the noise of unnecessary drama, he could finally hear himself think. One night we were at a small diner, steam rising from our coffee mugs. A couple in the booth behind us was arguing in sharp whispers. You could feel the tension even without seeing their faces. The man's voice carried a bitter edge. The woman's replies were clipped and defensive. In the past, Daniel might have been pulled into that energy, feeling the stress seep into his own mood. But now he just took a sip, glanced at the frost on the window, and said, "That's their storm, not mine." Those 5 words stuck with me. That's their storm, not mine. How many times had I stepped into storms that weren't mine, letting someone else's chaos soak me to the bone? It was almost absurd when you thought about it. We put up umbrellas for our own rain, but when it's someone else's downpour, we walk right in without hesitation. Daniel's life was still full of challenges. People still got angry, deadlines still pressed. Life didn't become an endless Zen retreat, but the difference now was that he moved through all of it. Like a stone in the river, water rushing around him never threw him, and that made all the difference. What storms have you been walking into lately? And what would it feel like to finally stay dry? The turning point for Daniel came during a family holiday gathering. Old wounds tend to reopen in those settings. Decades-old grievances dressed up as casual comments. At one point, a relative made a pointed remark about Daniel's career choices, the kind of jab that used to send him spiraling into defensiveness. This time, he simply said, "I'm happy with my path," and changed the subject. No heat in his voice, no smirk, just calm certainty. The conversation moved on, and Daniel's peace remained intact. It was in moments like that where I realized Stoicism wasn't about being stoic in the way most people think, blank-faced, emotionless. It was about deciding what emotions were worth your energy. It was about knowing the difference between feeling something and letting that feeling run your life. That's not suppression, that's mastery. If you could master just one reaction this week, which one would change your life the most? By spring, Daniel had grown into someone you almost wouldn't recognize, at least if you'd known him in the years before. The tension in his shoulders was gone. His laughter came more easily. He still faced deadlines, disagreements, unexpected setbacks, but he moved through them like a seasoned sailor steering through choppy waters. Steady hands, clear eyes, no wasted motion. It wasn't that life had become easier, it was that he had become harder to shake. One afternoon, we sat on a park bench under a canopy of new green leaves. Children were running in the distance, their shouts mixing with the hum of the city. Daniel watched them for a moment, then said, "The thing about control is you can't steal it from someone who refuses to trade it for approval." I asked him what he meant, and he smiled. Think about it. Most of the time, people get under our skin because we're hoping they'll like us, respect us, or see us a certain way. But the second you stop needing that, their power dissolves. It's like trying to pull on a rope that's not tied to anything. That was the heart of Stoicism, distilled into an image I couldn't forget. A rope only works if it's anchored. Manipulation only works if it has something to grab onto inside you. Take that away, and the tug-of-war ends before it begins. Daniel's days were still full, but no longer frantic. He chose his commitments carefully. He spoke less, but when he did, people listened. And perhaps most telling of all, he didn't carry other people's storms home with him. His mind was his own. How many of the ropes in your life are you still holding on to? And what would happen if you simply let them drop? The real magic came not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones, waking up without dread, ending a day with energy to spare, feeling fully present in a conversation because his mind wasn't replaying something that happened 3 days ago. That's what self-mastery gives you, not a life free from difficulty, but a life where difficulty doesn't own you. I remember asking him, "So what's next? You've built all this inner strength. What do you do with it?" He didn't hesitate. "I use it to live," he said, "not just survive other people's moods or chase after their approval. I spend it on the things that make life worth living." And that's the part we so often miss. Stoicism isn't about withdrawing from the world. It's about stepping into it without being consumed by it. Summer arrived, and with it came a sense of lightness in Daniel's life I hadn't seen before. We met one evening at a small rooftop bar, the city glowing below us like a scattered field of fireflies. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the skyline. "It's funny," he said. "I used to think freedom was about having no one tell me what to do. Now I realize it's about being untouchable, even when they do." He swirled the ice in his glass. You can't stop people from having opinions, from judging, from trying to push you, but you can stop handing them the keys to your mind. That was the final shift, realizing that the world isn't going to change just because you've decided to live differently. There will always be noise, provocation, attempts to pull you off balance. The difference is now, you have the choice not to dance to someone else's tune. And that choice, it's yours every single day. Daniel told me he doesn't think of himself as a Stoic any more than he thinks of himself as a walker when he's walking. It's just how he moves through life now, anchored in his own values, acting from reason instead of impulse, seeing every challenge as a chance to practice. That's what makes Stoicism so powerful. It's not a mask you wear, it's a muscle you build. If tomorrow the world tested you, an insult, a disappointment, a betrayal, would you still be standing in your own center? Or would you let the storm inside someone else become the storm inside you? As the night deepened and the air cooled, Daniel and I sat in comfortable silence. The hum of the city below was constant, but somehow distant. Like background music you don't have to pay attention to. I thought about all the people I knew who felt constantly yanked around by the moods and opinions of others, and how rare it was to see someone who had stepped off that carousel entirely. And it struck me, that's the real gift of Stoicism. Not a set of rules, but a way of being that makes you unshakable without making you unfeeling. A way of walking through life with your heart open and your peace protected. In a world obsessed with winning arguments, getting the last word, and proving worth to strangers, Stoicism invites you to quietly opt out, and in doing so, to win in a way most people will never understand. Not long ago, I ran into Daniel again, this time in a crowded train station. People rushed past us, voices overlapping, the air thick with movement and noise. Yet there he was, standing calmly, hands in his pockets, like an island in the middle of a busy sea. We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, just catching up. But as we parted ways, I noticed something. While everyone else was pushing forward in a hurry, Daniel moved at his own pace. Not slow, not rushed, just his pace. That's when I realized he wasn't just living Stoicism anymore. He had become it. The storm still existed, the noise was still loud, but they no longer owned a single piece of him. He chose his reactions, he chose his peace, and in choosing, he became impossible to control. And that's the thing most of us forget. People can't actually make you angry or anxious or jealous. They can only invite you into those states. The real question is, how often are you accepting the invitation? Every time you decline, you take back a little more of yourself. Every time you stand in your center, you grow stronger, steadier, freer. The Stoics didn't tell us to hide from life. They told us to live it fully, without handing our inner world to anyone else. Marcus Aurelius put it simply, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The moment you understand that, really understand it, something shifts. You stop waiting for others to change. You stop needing the world to be calm before you can be calm, and you realize the freedom you were chasing was always within reach. So maybe the next time someone tries to pull you into their storm, you can smile, take a breath, and remember, that's their storm, not mine. Because the truth is, the only person who can truly control you is you. And once you see that clearly, you're no longer playing anyone else's game. You're living on your own terms.